Okay, but I wanted to get back to this contrast between Descartes and Hobbes. Hobbes, remember, is slightly older than Descartes by 8 years. And it's kind of neat, I suppose. I asked that quiz question, who do you think is more influenced by Galileo, Descartes or Hobbes? Who the heck could figure that one out, actually? It's just a fun question. I usually get kind of a split, half and half. But in my own point of view, I think Hobbes is actually more directly influenced. For one thing, he actually met Galileo. Descartes traveled around a lot in Europe, but never went to Italy, as far as I know. Hobbes actually visited Italy and paid call on Galileo with his tutee. He would tutor individuals, and in fact, one of his young tutees, or mentees, whatever you want to call them, was the future King Charles II. So he was working for King Charles I, and that's kind of interesting, and you'll see how that ties in with other things. But the reason I think Hobbes is more directly influenced by Galileo is the nature of this machine business, how the human body is like a machine. I showed the picture of Dr. Tulip's anatomy lesson, where they're all looking at, like the wrist and trying to figure out how all these different tubes work and so on. The idea of the body being like a machine had an interesting characteristic in it, and that it isolated the body more. Before this point of view occurred, people really thought spirits kind of, merged right in with you, so that you could actually have spirits possess you and things of that sort, right? With the machine point of view, the machine becomes like an object that has a skin barrier so that things don't penetrate the body, so that you're, except for pointy objects and things of that sort, right? You end up with the sense that the body is kind of its own machine, separate from the outside. And it also leads an interesting development in the way we think of ourselves. And I could pose this issue as the idea of the modern person. What do we think of as the modern person, as opposed to, say, Aristotle, Plato, Augustine, really intriguingly? And this is the idea that you are an isolated, not only machine, but that you think within yourself and have a self that's not so attached to society, but it's instead your own individual self. And there's some interesting developments associated with this. If you are curious in a big sort of way in the whole progress of this, one of the best books on it is The Sources of the Self by Charles Taylor, who is, that's a new cover. But Charles Taylor, The Sources of the Self, he goes all the way back to Plato and very carefully details tons of literary developments and how they slowly, incrementally grow what we think of as the modern self, all the way up to the most recent incarnations of it, so to speak. So this is a fascinating but long study, and his other book, which is, he's actually got quite a few he's still producing, even though he's 80 something, His other book, let's see if I can just find it this way, well, there it is, The Secular Age, which is also, and that won the Templeton Prize, which is a prize given each year to an author who has come up with a work that connects science and religion in a very powerful way. So this one won that, The Secular Age. But so this details the incremental changes that take place as we develop things like new tools. So you can imagine as people today are all interested in social media and using the different apps and constantly, involved socially through these devices. Wow, what does that do to the nature of being human, right? That's the interest here. And when we're talking about Descartes, some argue that Descartes is the individual who's at fault for the way Western society has become so individualistic, so selfish. One of those individuals is Pope John Paul II. He loves you. Identity and memory. Memory and identity. And in this book, he argues that the Western culture is a culture of death. Because we're so focused on our own individual self and our pleasure and we don't even want to have children anymore or get married to have them, basically, because our focus is on using our individual wealth in order to have a good time, basically, to have all the luxuries and things that we would like. And we realize that having children is expensive. And these little brats use up our money. We have to spend money to, feed them and stuff. And as a result, who to blame for this culture of death, where we don't even want to have children or we want to abort them? If it looks like we're going to have one, that's his, concern. Who to blame? And he thinks Descartes is the one who's basically started this kind of individualist focus on the self, because I think, therefore, I am, not we are. And if you think about it, well, wait a minute. In order for me to think, I need a language. In order to have a language, I really can't be an individual. I have to live in a society that speaks a language that enables me to think of myself as a self. Even though I can individually transform the way words mean things, as Descartes apparently was doing, right? And it wasn't just him, of course. It's the milieu of Descartes and Hobbes. Another individual that argues about this whole process that I find actually a little bit more persuasive is Harold Bloom and the invention of the human. I don't want the PDF. That would be... The reason this is interesting is Harold Bloom argues that Shakespeare is the one at fault for this specific development. And in fact, in the book, he argues in a very specific place Shakespeare makes this leap. And it's in one of the most famous lines that we think of as Shakespeare. And if you were watching, if you were here and you saw the movie that I was playing for a little bit, and the poet, Harriman, thinks the great line from Descartes is to be or not to be, which is, no, that's wrong. And the presidential candidate corrects him, no. I think, therefore I am. That's Descartes' great line. To be or not to be is Shakespeare, and if you're familiar with the play Hamlet, that's the soliloquy, where Hamlet is standing there on the stage and contemplating suicide, actually, right? To be or not to be, well, maybe it'd be better not to be, when you're so pissed off at the world, right? So says Hamlet, right? Well, what's interesting is Descartes was familiar with this play. Shakespeare is slightly ahead of Descartes, and Shakespeare's plays in translation would have been available to Descartes, and so he was familiar at least with some of the Shakespearean plays, at least this one. So Harold Bloom is kind of on track. Who got us started thinking, in such an individualist way? It could have been Shakespeare. Now, it seems pretty obvious, though, if you go back even to, say, Augustine, when we were talking about Augustine, and Augustine gives us a fascinating proof. When I talked about hopefully I picked the right thing. Oh, this is a paper on it. I didn't want to pick on. Perhaps this. Okay. Well, I would have liked to have just quoted from it, but I'll just remember it as best I can, rather than keep looking for it. But when I mentioned Descartes' argument, where he increases the level of his doubt to the point where he maximizes it by contemplating an evil mind or devil that's basically making me think that this is a real world when none of it really exists, right? And then using that in order to come up with the solution, but he can't make me doubt that I exist. Because even if I'm doubting everything else, I at least know for sure that I exist and that I'm thinking and doubting, right? So you can't make me wrong about that, because if he is trying to confuse me about that, well, but who is it that's doubting all of this? It has to be me, right? So Descartes has an interesting argument there. If you go back to Augustine, though, in his reply to the skeptics already were doubting everything, very much the way Descartes does in that particular piece, right? And this is, of course, way back. This is the actual Academy skeptics, because remember the Academy founded by Plato in Athens. They evolved over time, and the leaders at a particular point were skeptics and concluded, gee, I can't even know for sure that I exist. And Augustine replies to them, I know that I exist because if I'm doubting that I'm existing, then I know that I exist. And I also love knowing that I know, right? And I know that I know, right? I messed it up. So, because I can doubt it, it convinces me that I know that I exist, then I know that I know something, because I'm not doubting it, and I love knowing it, right? And one of the neat things with Augustine is he does this in one paragraph instead of 5 days' work, which is what Descartes does, right? Plus, he also compares it to the Trinity, because there's these three parts that are in a sense very similar to the Trinity, even though, of course, he's not saying we're anything like the Trinity, right? God, God the Son, God the Holy Ghost, right? You know, that's not that. But still interesting in the tripartite nature of that. So, it's, by the way, clear to me that Descartes, being a student of the Jesuits in a school that would clearly have studied Augustine, would have known of that great argument and was basically just plagiarizing it, if I may say so, and